April 22nd, 1836, the Battle of San Jacinto had been fought the previous day, and the Texian forces, led by Sam Houston, had won a decisive victory against the Mexican forces. The leader of the Mexican forces, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, had managed to escape from the battle and had donned the uniform of a lowly private, but was soon discovered to be Santa Anna when he was recognized by some of his soldiers. Santa Anna was brought before Sam Houston, who had been shot through the ankle during the battle, and kept Santa Anna as a prisoner of war, despite calls from his own men to execute him. Through hard negotiations, on May 14, 1836, Santa Anna signed 2 treaties at Velasco, agreeing to remove Mexican forces from Texas and to advocate for Texas independence to the Mexican Senate in exchange for safe passage back to Mexico. A common misconception is that this agreement with Santa Anna marks the beginning of the Texas Republic, but it should be noted that Mexico would still consider Texas to be a region under rebellion. It wasn't until 1848, 12 years after the Battle of San Jacinto, that Mexico would give up on their claims to Texas after the defeat in the Mexican-American War. The next decade would be a precarious one for Texas, as they desperately sought international recognition, attempted peace negotiations with Mexico and Native American tribes, sought allies with other opponents of Mexico, and failed in their early attempts to persuade the United States to annex Texas. Still, Texas was a de facto independent nation, as Mexico was still licking their wounds and did not have the forces or supplies necessary to take back and hold their vast northern territory. Welcome to the Republic of Texas. Before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, because his life story is pretty wild. Personally, I would describe him as a dollar store Napoleon Bonaparte, which is funny because one of his nicknames was Napoleon of the West, a pretty grandiose title, but there are some comparisons between the two men. First of all, a young Napoleon rose quickly through the ranks during the turmoil of the French Revolution, and a young Santa Anna gained prominence for his role in the Mexican War of Independence against Spain. Santa Anna had originally been a loyalist to Spain, but switched sides to the rebellion, which was fortunate for him because the rebellion was successful and Mexico gained her independence in 1821. As a reward for fighting for the rebellion, Santa Anna was given command of the important port city of Veracruz, where he established his base of operations. His command was short-lived, however, as Emperor Agustin de Iturbide of the newly independent Mexico relieved Santa Anna of his command for some undisclosed act of insubordination. Santa Anna took his dismissal very poorly, and instead of stepping down, decided to rebel once again against the man he supported during the Mexican War of Independence. After about a year, Iturbide was dethroned, and after the establishment of a new republic, Santa Anna settled into his role as governor of the important port city of Veracruz. Santa Anna was involved in a minor rebellion in 1827 and another bigger one in 1828, following the second Mexican presidential election, in which the winner of the election, Manuel Gomez Pedraza, was ousted, with Santa Anna playing a key role in chasing Pedraza out of the country. In Pedraza's place, the runner-up in the election, Vicente Guerrero, took the office of the presidency in 1829. Later that year would come one of Santa Anna's greatest accomplishments. Just because Mexico gained her independence in 1821 didn't mean that the Spanish were about to give up their ambitions in Mexico. On July 26, 1829, an invasion force of 3,500 men, led by General Isidro Barradas, landed at Cabo Rojo, near the city of Tampico. Barradas led his men north, towards Tampico, while Santa Anna sailed north, with around 1,000 men, and landed near Tuxpan, and from there, moved his men north of Tampico, to the city of Altamira, where Mexican forces were awaiting reinforcements. In the meantime, the city of Tampico and the surrounding countryside had been evacuated of people and supplies to deny the invading Spanish forces any assistance from the locals and supplies to continue their war efforts. With their supplies cut off and their foraging parties constantly harassed by Mexican forces, it was only a matter of time before Barradas would be forced to capitulate. Disease and attrition was reducing the Spanish forces in size and effectiveness, while the Mexican forces were continuing to be reinforced. Finally, in September of 1829, Barradas accepted terms of surrender and was allowed to leave Mexico with his disarmed forces, with the promise to never take up arms against Mexico again. This would be Spain's last attempt to reconquer Mexico and solidified Santa Anna's status as a hero of the young Mexican Republic and propelled him to political prominence, helping him to secure his first term as president in 1833. Santa Anna would be involved in more battles later on in his career, including against the First French Intervention, appropriately named the Pastry War. But for now, I'll stop his biography here. I included all this history of Santa Anna because, growing up in Texas, what we learn of Santa Anna is that he's either an incompetent fool or a bloodthirsty tyrant, while forgetting what brought him to national prominence in the first place. This brings us to the Texas Revolution of 1835, in which the incompetent, bloodthirsty Santa Anna loses the war against the Texian rebels. Now, I'm not going to dive deep into the varied reasons behind the revolution, which includes factors like slavery, which was abolished in Mexico, and the increasing centralization of power by the Mexican government. To sum it up quickly, Santa Anna waged a particularly brutal campaign against the Texian forces, which included killing the Texian garrison at the Alamo and executing Texian POWs in Goliad, hoping it would dampen the rebels' will to fight. Instead, it had the opposite effect, and the angry and motivated Texian army won a decisive victory against Santa Anna's forces at San Jacinto. Just like Spain wasn't about to just let Mexico go after their rebellion, Mexico was likewise unwilling to relinquish their claim on Texas after the defeat at San Jacinto, and the Republic of Texas's brief period of independence was under constant threat. There was even an expedition of Mexican forces in 1842 that briefly occupied the city of San Antonio. As I had mentioned earlier in this video, the government of Texas had attempted to persuade the United States into annexing the newly formed republic. Here are some selected quotes from an exchange that took place in 1837 between John Forsyth, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Memucan Hunt, the envoy and minister plenipotentiary of the Republic of Texas. Texas seeks to be annexed, first and foremost, because she is a nation of the same blood with the people of the United States. The history of this country is her history. She claims annexation by the kindred ties of blood, language, institution, by a common origin, by a common history, and by a common freedom. Her gallant sons were born upon your soil, and they exult in the conviction that at Goliad, San Antonio, Concepcion, and San Jacinto, they attested the legitimacy of their Anglo-American blood, and, appealing to victories in the cause of liberty, they ask if a single star of Texas is not worthy to be added to the brilliant cluster of their mother flag. There is some dramatic flourish in this passage, to be sure, but I think it's quite well written. There is also a lot of hinting of agricultural economic competition between Texas and the United States that borders on threatening, in my opinion. Forsyth, as a representative of the United States, shoots down Hunt's suggestion of annexation, in part, writing, "Neither the duties nor the settled policy of the United States permits them to enter into an examination of the accuracy of the historical facts related by General Hunt, nor to allow them, if even admitted to be correct, to control the decision of the question presented by him. The United States were foremost in acknowledging the independence of Mexico, and have uniformly desired and endeavored to cultivate relations of friendship with that power, having always, since the formation of their government, been exempt from civil wars. They have learned the value of internal quiet, and have consequently been anxious yet passive spectators of the feuds with which their neighbors have been afflicted. Although the controversy between Texas and Mexico, circumstances have existed, and events have occurred, peculiarly calculated to enlist the sympathies of our people, the efforts of the government has been to look upon the dispute also with the same rigid impartiality with which it has regarded all other Mexican commotions. In addition, Forsyth writes, "So long as Texas shall remain at war, while the United States are at peace with her adversary, the proposition of the Texian minister plenipotentiary necessarily involves the question of war with that adversary. The United States are bound to Mexico by a treaty of amity and commerce, which will be scrupulously observed on their part, so long as it can be reasonably hoped that Mexico will perform her duties and respect our rights under it." The exchange between Forsyth and Hunt concludes amicably enough, with Hunt writing, "The undersigned most respectfully assures the Honorable Mr. Forsyth, and through him, His Excellency, the President of the United States, that the prompt and decisive rejection of the proposition for the annexation of Texas to the United States will not be imputed to an unfriendly spirit to the government and people of Texas." It wasn't until Texas was annexed by the United States and Mexico's subsequent defeat in the Mexican-American War that Mexico finally acknowledged that Texas was no longer part of Mexico, although Texas had now lost its status as an independent republic. But before that, the Republic of Texas was recognized by a number of other nations as independent, including by the United States. Andrew Jackson, in one of his last acts as president, appointed an ambassador to Texas on March 3, 1837, formally recognizing Texas as an independent nation. Other countries, like France, Netherlands, and Britain, would recognize Texas independence in the following years. To that end, the borders between the Republic of Texas and the United States of America had to be decided upon by their respective governments. During its brief existence, the Republic of Texas claimed more territory than Texas's current borders. Part of the Republic's borders may look familiar to us today. This includes its southern border, which is defined by the Rio Grande. Much of the northern border is defined by the Red River. The eastern side of the Texas Panhandle falls on the 100th meridian west, which once served as a border between the French and Spanish in America, and later the U.S. and Mexico. The northern border of the Panhandle is at the 36½ degree north latitude of the equator, as agreed to by the Missouri Compromise, where future states from the Western Territories would either be admitted as slave or free states into the Union. As for Texas's borders with New Mexico, that was decided in the Compromise of 1850, in which territory that was recently ceded to the United States from Mexico after the Mexican-American War was organized into various territories. However, the border that I will be elaborating more on here is the border between Texas and Louisiana, which is, in large part, defined by the flow of the Sabine River. Here we have, quite possibly, the last international border marker remaining within the borders of the United States. This isn't the original granite marker, but rather a replacement, as the first fell into the Sabine River due to erosion of the riverbank. The granite monument serves as a marker for the meridian boundary between Texas and Louisiana and contains the date on which the survey was conducted, and on one side of the marker are the letters RT for the Republic of Texas, and on the other side, US for the United States. When Texas became a republic in 1836, they formed a commission with the United States to settle the border between Texas and the United States. The United States was represented by John Forsyth and Texas by Memucan Hunt. The U.S. survey team included Major J.D. Graham, First Lieutenant Thomas J. Lee, and George G. Meade, while the Texas team was represented by engineers P.J. Pillions, D.C. Wilbur, and his assistant A.B. Gray. The survey crew began their work on May 20th, 1840, at the Gulf of Mexico by placing a 36-foot pole on top of a hill and proceeding to work northwards, placing markers along the way. This granite marker stands about 2.4 miles north of the bend of the Sabine River at latitude 32nd parallel north, which also happens to define part of the border between Texas and New Mexico. This bend in the river is where the border between Texas and Louisiana stops being defined by the Sabine River and goes straight up, roughly in line with longitude 94th meridian west, up to the Red River, where Texas and Arkansas share a border. Like many states in the U.S., the borders of Texas may, at first, seem odd, but there are reasons as to why it is shaped the way it is. This granite marker serves as a reminder of the brief time in history when Texas was an independent republic and its own borders with the United States were considered an international border. The history of how Texas even fell away from Mexican control is a fascinating subject as well, and goes back to when the Spanish were the dominant European power in the Americas. Spain's focus on Cuba and Mexico, their lack of investment in men and resources in their northern territories, and the strength of the native tribes in Texas hampered their attempts to establish a firm foothold in present-day Texas. Spain's tenuous presence in Texas would later become Mexico's problem as their American neighbors expanded ever westward, but that's a story for another video. I know this video was a bit disjointed, but this is really a subject that deserves a deep dive, and I'd like to break apart some of the more interesting bits of Mexican, Texas, and U.S. history into smaller chunks so I can dive deeper into more detail. I plan on making more videos about these topics from the early 19th century to the early 20th century, so stay tuned for more videos. Thanks for watching, guys.